Good morning, I'm Duncan, you're watching Wake Up Well. It's Saturday the 18th of April and we're continuing our series in the book of Proverbs. We're landing in chapter 18 and I'm just going to pick out verse 2 today. It says this: Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. You know, not long after I got married, my wife told me that her mum used to think I was arrogant when I was a teenager. It actually made me chuckle because as I reflected on it, she was totally right. I was like the fool that Solomon refers to here in this verse. I delighted in sharing my own opinions far too much. I didn't really consider it arrogance at the time because most of the time it was my opinion about God, and I mean, who wouldn't want to know that, right? It wasn't until I met a few other people who were the same, who really got under my skin and annoyed me, that I began to see it in myself. It's funny, isn't it? The things that irritate us the most in other people are quite often the same things that we're prone to doing ourselves. Just sometimes it takes a while for us to spot it. I began to learn that sometimes I was wrong. Ding, ding, ding. It's a pretty humbling process. But learning to keep my mouth shut has been the biggest life-saving lesson I've learned. I love the saying that's often attributed to Abraham Lincoln. It said, better to remain silent and be thought of as a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. I also began to learn that even when I am right and I do know something, it's not actually always appropriate to share. Just a couple of verses earlier in Proverbs, we read in Proverbs 17:27, the one who has knowledge uses words with restraint. You know, the foolish person isn't actually really interested in true understanding. They're more interested in being seen and heard. Conversely, people who have the greatest depth of knowledge and understanding are actually some of the slowest to speak. Back in Proverbs 9, Solomon tells us that true understanding is knowledge of the Holy One. And this isn't just intellectual kind of knowledge. The Hebrew word used for knowledge here comes from the root word yada. It's the same word that back in Genesis is used when it talks about Adam knowing his wife and she conceived. I mean, that's a pretty intimate kind of knowledge, isn't it? Where we know someone really personally and intimately. And when you really know God, you quickly realize that anything you do have that's of value has come from God anyway. True knowledge keeps you humble, and therefore you find no need to rush to say something. I find it really interesting in the current coronavirus crisis that many people have been really quick to speak out with their opinions of what God's doing. But actually, some of those I look up to the most who know Jesus really well are only now just beginning to speak out. One of my spiritual heroes and parent in the faith, as it were, just a couple of days ago put out a message saying how when the crisis kicked off, they thought they were going to be putting out daily messages and sharing their thoughts. But the Lord spoke to them really clearly, saying to be very sparing of what they share, instead drawing people to go to the source of understanding for themselves. There's an incredible wisdom in that. Let me pray for us. Father, I ask today that you would help us not to be foolish, that you'd help us to be wise, to be like James tells us, to be slow to speak and to be quick to listen. Would you help us to be wise by seeking out true understanding today through getting to know you, the Holy One?